welcome to Vimy. My name is Maxime. I'll be your tour guide today. I'm one of 16 Canadian guides that work here at Vimy for this summer. So it's quite a privilege to be here, to be guardians of remembrance for all the soldiers that participated in the First World War. So before starting our tour, I'll always ask the same question. If you look behind me, you see a beautiful flag right there. I think you may have seen it before. It's the Canadian flag, right? What's important to remember is that it was not created until 1965. So it would not have been here in 1917 for the assault on Vimy. It would have been the British flag, because Canada is still what we call a dominion. A dominion, what it means is that everything that's interior policy is controlled by Canadian elected officials, but everything that's exterior is still controlled by the British. So on the 4th of August 1914, Britain declares war to Germany, and at the same time you have Canada, you have Australia, you have New Zealand, all the dominions enter the war at the same time. To give you an idea of Canadian participation, Canada in 1914, it's about 8 million people. 600,000 men and people enlisted for the First World War. That's roughly 7% of the Canadian population. So it goes to show why there's so many people who have ancestors who fought during the First World War. Out of the 600,000 who served, 100,000 were part of the Canadian Corps that were here in October of 1916 to prepare for the assault on Vimy later in April of 1917. Why would they be here at Vimy? There's many reasons, but one of the main ones is the strategic importance. Today we have a monument, which is the Canadian National Vimy Monument for the First World War, and it's on top of Hill 145. From this hill, you have a great vantage point on the entirety of the region. So the German forces, they control it since 1914. So they have a great advantage in seeing over the entirety of the region. So taking that away from them would be a good thing for the Allied forces. Another thing that adds to this strategic importance is when you get to the monument, you'll be able to see some black pyramids in the distance. Those are slag heaps. Slag heaps are from coal mining, which reminds us that the north of France is a coal mining region, and coal is a very important resource for the First World War. So taking control of this resource is also very important. So I've talked a lot about the assault on Vimy, but it's important to remember it's part of a bigger assault called the Battle of Arras, which is a 20-kilometer front, and it involves the British, the Australians, and the Canadians, right? So out of that big 20-kilometer front, the Canadian Corps has 7 kilometers. So our site today, to give you an idea, is 1.2 square kilometers. So it's not even close to the entirety of the Canadian front of 1917. So just to give you an idea of where everyone is located, there's 4 divisions in the Canadian Corps. The 1st division is the furthest this way. Then you have the 2nd. The 3rd would be located where we are currently. And the 4th division would be where the monument is today. So this is the first time in the First World War that the 4 Canadian divisions attacked at the same time. So as I mentioned before, the Canadian Corps, they arrived quite early in October of 1916 to prepare for the assault. They did a lot of things. One of those things is helping and digging the subways, which is our next stop right there, if you will follow me to our next stop in the entrance of the subways. So you can actually see right now, this is the entrance of the subway we're about to go down to. This is the Grange subway right there. But just before going down, I would just want to point out something right there. In this direction, you see a sign right here. It's written Canadian Front Line, right? So if you look in that direction, all the holes there, they're not from shells, right? They're all it's the trench from the Canadian front line. So before going down into the subways, just to give you an idea, This is one of 13 subways that were dug for the offensive in 1917. It's a total of 10 kilometers that was dug. So I'll be actually going down to try and see and understand what the soldiers felt back in 1917. So you can follow me down in the subways. I just have to tell you, security measures again, just be mindful of your head. It's a bit uneven, the ground. And also, if you want to come up, you can always ask me. I have to say that. Be good. Maxime, ma coordonnateur. Je descends dans les souterrains avec un visiteur. So welcome to the Grange subway. Just close the door. Follow me downstairs. We're currently going 8 meters underground. So we're currently where the soldiers would have stood back in 1917. So this is the preserved subway right there. It's important to say that it did change quite a bit since 1917, right? All the cement pillars, all the metal grates that are here, they were added later to preserve. But before, it would have been in wooden pylons that would have supported these subways. Another major difference is that currently it's quite large, the subways, right? You can see here, it would have been considerably narrower, 1 meter wide and 2 meters high. So a lot smaller. Another big difference is the lights. Currently, we see each other quite well. We see very far down the subways. It would not have been the case back then. I can turn off the lights to show you what it was like back then. Oh, sorry. So if you want to go a bit forward, maybe I'll be above. So you see the only light that's still on. It's one light like that every 20 meters. So for the soldiers that are down here in the subways, it's quite a different experience because you can imagine they can still hear the shells falling above their heads. So we get a glimpse of what they felt, but it's very far from what they actually had to endure back in 1917. Yeah, sorry, you have to. Perfect. So now that we've talked about how the subways look like in 1917, we can now walk through the subways and see how they were dug by the Royal Engineers in 1916 and 1917. Let's follow me. All the walls that are dug here, it's all in chalk, right? So you can notice, if you look closely, you'll see some writing sometimes of soldiers. We have quite a clear one a bit further in the subways. This one right here. You can see this is quite clear. Hailer, right? The subways were enlarged after the First World War, so we cannot guarantee that every single one is from the First World War. But it's quite interesting to see that there are thousands in these subways still today. All right, so we were in the Grange subway. Now it connects to what we call the Black Watch Tunnel. So everything that you see in here, it's a replica of what they would have used to dig the subway. So you actually see the wheelbarrows with the chalk bags. And if you look to the left right here, you see an example of a shovel and a pickaxe, right? Which reminds us that everything was dug by hand, right? Imagine digging all of these subways, a total of 10 kilometers by hand. To give you an idea, every meter that they had to dig is about 200 bags of the size that you saw. 200 bags. So it's a considerable effort to get all the chalk bags out of the subways because you want this subway to remain a secret, right? You don't want the German forces to know exactly where the subway is, because otherwise they would try and destroy it. So they would bring the chalk back kilometers back. This is where the Canadians helped a lot in bringing these chalk bags and hiding them under some mud. Because imagine if there's a plane that flies over the German forces and sees bright white chalk in the morning. It's quite obvious what they're doing, right? So they try and conceal it the most that they can. Because again, if they dig and it's a bit too loud and the German forces hear about it, what would they do? Imagine, currently we're 8 meters underground. They would dig a tunnel 30 meters underground, put kilograms of amino, which is an explosive, and they blow it up. This is deep tunneling warfare. And throughout the entirety of the First World War, on both sides, either the German forces or the British, French, Canadian forces, deep tunneling warfare is happening. And what's interesting is that we actually have a preserved entrance of a deep tunnel. If you guys want to follow me, we can take a look quickly. So this is the entrance of a deep tunnel for deep tunneling warfare right there. So you see it goes quite deep underground. To give you an idea, we've been walking in the subways, right? In this tunnel, it's impossible. You have to crawl. They have to bring air pumps to bring oxygen because it's way too deep. So it's another area of the war that's happening. You can imagine in the sky with planes, on the ground, but also 30 meters underground for some people. Yeah. So now we'll be heading out of the subways. We can head to the exit where I can talk a bit before exiting the subway. So we're about to enter into the headquarters of the 42nd Battalion right there. So you can imagine in here would have been an office, and this is where the battalion officer would meet his soldiers for giving them orders. So before we head out of the subways, I can try and put you in the minds of the soldiers, because this very subway where we've walked around, 1,000 soldiers would have weighed in the morning of the 9th of April. At 4:30 in the morning, they would have exited this very subway to take their place in the trenches and begin the assault an hour later. Remember, they're in the dark. There's also the chance that there's a deep tunnel right under them. For most of them, it's their first battle experience. If you struggle to imagine how they look, you can take me. I'm 22 years old. The average age is about 23, 24. Right? It's just the difference. I'm giving a tour and they had to live through it. So when we exit the subways, we'll see it's quite a sunny day outside. You'll see there's plenty of green. You'll hear birds chirping, but then it's artillery thumping down. So we'll be exiting the subways now. Yeah. Perfect. So you can now follow me out of the subways. So you can see, you can hear the bird chirping outside. You can take your place in the observation post right there. I'll be closing right behind you. So currently we're in what's called an observation trench, right? So all that you see right here, cement bags, it was changed in 1917, right? This was not what it was in 1917. It would have been sandbags that are much, much higher, right? Because currently you can see all around us. It's not the case back then. Another major difference is that currently we're stepping in the trenches and our feet are still dry, right? Back then, you have to imagine it's filled with mud and rats. Soldiers had to live in these conditions, and it's a very, very big difference in what we're having today. So you have to imagine this observation post is 25 meters away from the German forces. So you can imagine the soldiers that are posted here, 25 meters on the other side, it's the assault that's happening. So try to put your minds of the soldiers, it's quite hard and difficult. So now that we've talked about trench life, we can now make our way to the crater line to talk about the assault that happened on the 9th of April, 1917. You can follow me. So just to give you an idea about the conditions that the soldiers had to go through, this is a great example, right? Imagine the soldiers, they have to wash in these conditions, and a big problem was that their feet would remain always wet. And if that happened, they would get trench foot, right? Trench foot can lead to amputation. So one of the solutions was getting a new pair of socks. Very, very often, that's where Canadian women played a role. In Canada, many mothers associations got together and made millions and millions of socks. So we have a picture right there, which is interesting. So you can see the First World War, we talk a lot about the soldiers, but it's very much the entirety of the society, of Canadian society, which is involved in this effort. So remember when I mentioned deep tunneling warfare, right? And the huge craters they could create? We have an example right there. This is not created by a normal shell falling from the sky. You have to imagine a tunnel being dug 30 meters underground and a huge explosion that create craters like these. So you can imagine here we see the crater. There's the Canadian front line, Canadian observation post, that we just exited from. If you look on the other side of the crater, you'll see like a signpost and some cement right there. This is the German forces observation trench, 25 meters apart. This is one of the shortest distances in the First World War. It's not like the same distance for the 7-kilometer front. Sometimes it's much longer, but it's still striking to see to this day. So you can imagine at 5:30 in the morning on the 9th of April, some soldiers were posted right there, here in this very trench, and they went over to start the assault. As you may have already heard, the 9th of April, the assault on Vimy is quite a success for the Canadian Corps. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Division are able to take their objective in one day. For the 4th Division, which is located where the monument is today, it's a lot steeper, the defenses are a lot stronger, so it takes 2 days to take. But by the 12th of April, the ridge is under Canadian control, and the ridge will remain under Allied hands for the rest of the war. So it's quite a success that yet comes at a great cost. Still, to this day, the 9th of April 1917 is the deadliest day in Canadian military history. 2,400 men died in one day. For the entirety of the battle, 30,000 men went forward, 10,602 were casualties. That's more than a third of the soldiers that participated. For the German forces, it's quite similar, about 10,000 casualties. Because it's important to say that yes, we're a Canadian site, but we're truly here to commemorate everyone, right? If you go into our visitor center, you'll be able to see it's written in French, English, and German. So whether it's a German life loss, Canadian, French, English, we're here to remember that it's a political war after all. So many of the casualties, many of the deaths that happened here, the soldiers are still on our grounds today. They were never found. We may have never seen them again, they never came home, but that does not mean that we forgot about them. Because still to this day, their names are inscribed on our monument. 11,285 Canadians who died in France and were never found. So as a thank you for the First World War, France ceded this land in 1922, and the monument was erected in 1936. So by taking this visit today, by taking time out of your busy schedules to come and visit Vimy and other First World War memorials, you're keeping their memory alive. So thank you for taking the time to visit today. It's been a great pleasure to show you around the site. And if you have any questions, I'll be a pleasure. Have a nice day.